Hello and welcome to Moneylife News and Views. I am Debashis Basu. In the mid 1990s, when Indian corporates were struggling to handle an economic slowdown, it was quite serious. High interest rates, I had developed a simple rule of thumb to filter high quality companies. Now, my question was, does the company earn a significant part of its revenues from exports? Why would this be important? The logic behind this was straightforward. If a company could thrive in a fiercely competitive global marketplace, despite India's red tape, poor infrastructure, and high taxes, it must be running a high quality operation. Of course, one had to be cautious. Back then, tax breaks and subsidies for exports often led to inflated and what is called fake exports. But this could be tackled by examining the other aspects of the business, which is the size of the business, the quality of the management, cash flows, and so on and so forth. A simple focus on exports would have thrown up the biggest gainers of the last 30 years, and these were pharmaceutical companies. They all fitted into this metric. They were world beaters. The question is, can this logic be applied to a country? It is no surprise that all developed countries have a very strong export sector, especially the 4 or 5 of them that have actually become developed nations within one generation. Just 4 or 5 of them, right? That's Taiwan, that's Korea, that's China, and Japan. Now, all of them become developed nations in the last 100 years. There are about 200 countries for which World Bank and United Nations Trade and Development have compiled per capita export data. Now, I realize per capita is not always the best metric, but it gives you an idea. In that listing, India is ranked 153, as against South Korea's 44 and Taiwan's 35. If you think India is a service export powerhouse, India's rank in service per capita service exports is 89 out of 114. We are trailing behind nations like Malaysia, Turkey, and Thailand. Many highly promising economies of the last few decades, like Brazil, that was supposed to break into rich nation status, but could not, have coincidentally poor per capita export figures. So there's something about export which really differentiate between a high quality country and an average country. Even China, the world's manufacturing powerhouse, is at 103. This could be because, apart from a large population base, of course, which affects India and China, China's exports are of lower value than Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. And it's obvious why prosperous countries rank high on exports. Just like a company that excels in global markets, a country's exports signal a range of economic health factors. World-class infrastructure, high standards of education, technological innovation, a well-functioning financial system, social cohesion, and a thriving private sector, all supported by thoughtful and consistent government policies. The exceptions are nations that are very richly endowed with huge natural resources and low population, such as Saudi Arabia. These are outliers, as are some very specialized agricultural economies like Denmark or New Zealand. For most other countries, exports signal that the country is doing something right on a variety of metrics. Now, we all know the government has to plan. Economic plans. Economic planning can have many objectives, which is increasing domestic production, employment, reducing inequality, regional development, etc. Many of these are competing claims. You can't have them at the same time. The question is, what is the one thing that could drive India's economic success? Now, the concept of one thing comes from Gary Keller and Jay Papasan's book. It's a bestseller, The One Thing. You must read it. They argue that there is often one action. They talk about individual lives, but I think it applies to a lot of things, including countries. There is often one action that makes a lot of everything else easier or unnecessary. There's one thing that you do so that so many other things become unnecessary, right? For most countries, that answer is double-digit export performance for years together and climbing up the global value chain. If you can have that as your one focus, a lot of things will fall in place and many other things will become unnecessary. It is surprising that India has not followed this path, even though there have been plenty of examples from export-led economic miracles from the 1950s. Closer home, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan embarked on this strategy very successfully, which was then partly copied later by Thailand and Malaysia. Not as successful, but they still try to copy this. And of course, Vietnam, which has been successful. And China, which is for 30 years, this is what they were doing. There's a lot of debate around the world on what ought to be the path for poor countries to become rich. Economists Darren Acemoglu and James Robinson, they won a Nobel Prize in 2024 for a concept which emphasized the role of institutions. They elaborated this in the book Why Nations Fail. However, real life evidence shows the triumph of economic nationalism is also very important, under which infant industry is initially protected to acquire the building blocks of manufacturing, but is soon forced to compete along with other national champions on the international markets. Now, this model is what transformed Germany in the late 1800s. Japan learned from Germany and employed the recipe in 1900, especially after the Second World War, followed by two Japanese colonies, Taiwan and South Korea, which both learned from Japan and emulated it. Finally, China, starting late, has taken exports to a whole new level that now threatens large swathes of Western high technology industries as well. Each of these countries started at the lowest end of the value chain. Japan was exporting raw silk in the late 19th century, then textiles, then bicycles, cheap electronics, then cars, and so on, and moved up the technology ladder. While India has wasted 3 decades in muddling along, even after the so-called economic liberalization of 1991, of which we are very proud, under the Modi government, there is a faint element of economic nationalism in schemes such as production-linked incentives and Make in India. But for these schemes to be really effective, it has to use the playbook of export champions of Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and China. The incentive has to be linked to exports, not just import substitution or just higher production. Initially, it will be hard, which will automatically reveal what needs to be done to make each of the sectors export competitive. In each of the 4 countries I described that have recorded extraordinary growth, the government worked together with the manufacturers to help them import technology, arrange cheap finance, culled out the weaker players, and relentlessly imposed export discipline. India should learn from this. This is an already successful model and adapt. Fortunately, India already has many of the ingredients for success. We wasted a lot of time, but meanwhile, many sectors like pharmaceuticals, chemicals, steel, engineering, and services, India has both domestic scale and global competitive edge. 2, the timing is right too. So far, the third world has been cowed down by what is called the Washington Consensus. Now, what is Washington Consensus? This is a World Bank, IMF, US, Western Europe diktat, which consisted of which imposed fiscal discipline, trade and financial liberalization, privatization, etc., on third world countries, saying that this is your recipe for growth. And well, there is not a single country in the world which has become rich by following Washington Consensus. Now, the US itself has taken a sharp turn towards isolationist policies of economic nationalism and protectionism. Now, who is going to impose Washington Consensus on us? So, while it's late, the timing is even better now to focus on an export-led Indian miracle. If the government is really interested in pursuing this strategy, it will have to create a system of carrots and sticks within long-term targets. The Make in India slogan needs to be amended to Make in India for the world, and big business subjected to a strict export discipline, the Adani and Ambani groups included. It is the only route to a Viksit Bharat. If you liked what you watched, please do share and do subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching.